Namaste, Hamesha Kushrobitia. I am JVN Dr. Minakshi, Assistant Professor in Department of Shalakya Tantra, Faculty of Ayurvedic Science, Jyoti Vidyapeeth, Women's University. Today in this session, we will discuss the herpes zoster ophthalmicus. It is a viral type of corneal ulcer. The herpes zoster ophthalmicus is an acute infection of the Visceral ganglion of the fifth cranial nerve by the varicella zoster virus (VZV). It constitutes approximately 10% of all cases of herpes zoster. The etiology of the herpes zoster ophthalmicus is the varicella zoster virus. It is the DNA virus and produces the acidophilic intranuclear inclusion bodies. It is neurotropic in nature, and it is the mode of infection. The mode of infection is the infection is contracted in the childhood, which manifests as the chickenpox, and the child develops immunity. The virus then remains dormant in the sensory ganglion of the trigeminal nerve. It is thought that usually in the elderly people, whereas, otherwise it can occur in any age, but usually in the elderly people with the depressed cellular immunity, the virus reactivates, replicates, and travels down along one or more of the branches of the ophthalmic division of the fifth nerve. Then we will discuss the clinical features of the herpes zoster ophthalmicus. In herpes zoster ophthalmicus, the frontal nerve is more frequently affected than the lacrimal and nasociliary nerves. About 50% cases of the herpes zoster ophthalmicus get ocular complications. The Hutchinson's rule, which implies that ocular involvement is frequent if the side or tip of nose presents vesicles, that the cutaneous involvement of the nasociliary nerve is there, then it is useful but not infallible. The lesions of herpes zoster are strictly limited to the one side of the midline of head. Then we come to the clinical phases of the herpes zoster ophthalmicus. These are acute, which may totally resolve, then chronic, which may persist for years, and relapsing, where the acute or chronic lesions reappear sometimes years later. The clinical features of herpes zoster ophthalmicus include the general features, the cutaneous lesions and the ocular lesions. In addition, there may be associated other neurological complications like general features. Uh, uh, General features are like the onset of illness is sudden with fever, malaise, and severe neuralgic pain along the course of the affected nerve. The distribution of the pain is so characteristic of zoster that it usually arouses the suspicion of the nature of the disease before the appearance of vesicles. Then there are cutaneous lesions. The cutaneous lesions in the area of the distribution of involved nerve appear usually after 3 to 4 days of onset of the disease. To begin with, the skin of lids and other affected areas become red and edematous, followed by the vesicle formation. In due course of time, vesicles are converted into pustules which subsequently burst to become crusting ulcers. When crusts are shed, the permanent pitted scars are left. The active eruptive phase lasts for about 3 weeks. The main symptom is severe neuralgic pain, which usually diminishes with the subsidence of the eruptive phase, but sometimes it may persist for years with little diminution of intensity. There occurs some anesthesia of the affected skin, which then associated with continued post-herpetic neuralgia is called the anesthesia dolorosa. There can be ocular lesions, like there can be conjunctivitis, there can be zoster keratitis, then there can be episcleritis and scleritis, there can be rhidocyclitis, there can be acute retinal necrosis, there can be anterior segment necrosis and thysis bulbi, and there can be secondary glaucoma. And apart from that, there can be associated neurological complications such as motor nerve palsies, optic neuritis, and encephalitis. So next is the treatment. The therapeutic approach to the herpes zoster ophthalmicus should be vigorous and aimed at preventing severe devastating ocular complications and promoting rapid healing of the skin lesions without the formation of massive crust, which result in scarring of the nerves and post-herpetic neuralgia. The regime which is followed is the systemic therapy for herpes zoster, oral antiviral drugs. These significantly decrease the pain, curtail vesiculation, stop viral progression, and reduce the incidence as well as severity of the keratitis and iritis. In order to be effective, the treatment should be started immediately after the onset of rash. Then it has no effect on post-herpetic neuralgia. We can use the cyclovir in a dose of 800 milligram 5 times a day for 10 days, or we can use the valacyclovir in a dose of 500 milligram TDS. Then we can give the analgesics. Pain during the first 2 weeks of an attack is very severe and should be treated by analgesics such as combination of mefenamic acid and paracetamol, pentazocine, or even pethidine when pain is severe. Then we can give the systemic steroids. They appear to inhibit the development of post-herpetic neuralgia when given in high doses. However, the risk of high doses of steroid in elderly should always be taken into consideration. Steroids are commonly recommended in cases developing neurological complications such as Thurner palsy and optic neuritis. Then cimetidine in a dose of 300 milligram QID for 2 to 3 weeks starting within 48 to 72 hours of onset has also been shown to reduce pain and pruritus in acute zoster. And then amitriptyline should be used to relieve the accompanying depression in acute phase. Then the local therapy for skin lesions, antibiotic, corticosteroid, skin ointment or lotions, they should be used 3 times a day till skin lesions heal. No calamine lotion. The cool zinc calamine application as advocated earlier is better avoided as it promotes crust formation. Then local therapy for ocular lesions for zoster keratitis, iridocyclitis, and scleritis. Topical steroid eye drops should be given. Cycloplegic should be given. Topical acyclovir eye ointment should be instilled. To prevent secondary infection, topical antibiotics are used. For secondary glaucoma, timolol, acetazolamide are given. For neuroparalytic corneal ulcer, lateral tarsorrhaphy should be performed. For persistent epithelial defects, lubricating artificial eye drops are given. Bandage of soft contact lens is applied. And the last is the keratoplasty. It may be required for visual rehabilitation of zoster patients with dense scarring. However, these are poor risk patients. So here the treatment of the herpes zoster ophthalmicus completes here. Uh, in this PPT, though it, the topic is there in the very short, so you should consult the book of A.K. Khurana for detailed description of this topic. So please refer that book. And next we will discuss protozoal keratitis. Thank you so much. This session is powered by Digital Version 2.0, Jyoti Vidyapeeth Women's University. I hope you are satisfied with my digital session. If you have any query, please mention in the comment box. I will resolve it. Thank you so much.
diopter, which is the one third of the total refractive power of the eye. It is a three-fourth of the total refractive power of eye. That is, the total refractive power of eye is 60 diopter, and that of cornea is 45 diopter. Then the histology, there are 6 layers: anterior epithelium, Bowman's membrane, central stroma, Dua's layer, Descemet's membrane, endothelium. You can see in this image the epithelium, Bowman's layer, stroma, Dua's layer, Descemet's layer, and endothelium. First, the epithelium. The cornea epithelium is stratified, squamous, and non-keratinized. It is continuous with conjunctival epithelium at limbus, but having no goblet cells. Thickness is 50 to 90 micrometer. Consists of 5 or 6 layers of nucleated cells resting on a basal lamina, namely the basal cells, wing cells, and the surface cells. The basal lamina is secreted by the basal cells. It is 0.1 to 1 micrometer wide. Ultrastructurally, it is distinguished in two parts: lamina lucida and lamina densa. Lamina lucida is superficial, lamina densa is deep osmophilic. Then epithelial turnover. The early study suggested that the epithelium replaced approximately weekly by division of basal cells and the older shell from the surface. It is now recognized that the germinative region lies at the limbus. The stem cells and the cells migrate at a very slow rate to the center of cornea, which may be as long as the ear. Second layer, the Bowman's membrane. It binds the corneal stroma anteriorly with basement membrane of epithelium. It is not a true elastic membrane. Once destroyed, does not regenerate. Shows considerable resistance to infection and injury. Third layer is the stroma, which is 0.5 mm thick. The stroma or substantia propria occupies about 90% of the total corneal thickness. Composed of corneal collagen fibrils, keratocytes, and extracellular ground substances, the lamellae are arranged in many layers, 200 to 250, and are parallel to each other. The anterior one-third stroma has a lamella are thin, and in the posterior two-third of the stroma, the lamellae are larger. Next layer is the Dua's layer, which was discovered by Dr. Harminder Singh Dua at the University of Nottingham in 2013. It is a fourth layer which is 15 microns thick. It is a strong layer and impervious to air. Fifth layer is the Descemet's membrane. It is a strong homogeneous layer. It is a basement membrane of endothelium made up of the collagen and glycoproteins. It is elastic. It can regenerate. It has a resistance to chemical agents, infection, and pathological processes. The peripheral rim of Descemet's membrane is the internal landmark of the corneal limbus, and also it is the anterior limit of the trabecular measure, which is called the Schwalbe's line. Then the last layer is the endothelium. Corneal endothelium is a simple squamous epithelium. Endothelial cells are hexagonal, which forms a continuous mosaic pattern, best seen in specular microscopy. Cell density at birth is 6,000 cells per micrometer square, and in young adults 2,500 to 3,000 cells per square millimeter. The endothelial cells cannot divide or replicate. With aging, the cell density of the endothelium decreases, which is compensated by an increase in the cell size or shape. As these endothelial cells are involved in corneal hydration, they help in maintenance of corneal transparency. The blood supply of cornea. The cornea is a vascular structure. Small loops derived from the anterior ciliary vessels invade its periphery for about 1 mm. Actually, these loops are not in cornea but in the subconjunctival tissue which overlaps the cornea. Then the nerve supply of the cornea. Cornea is supplied by the anterior ciliary nerves, which are branches of the ophthalmic division of fifth cranial nerve. After going about 2 mm in cornea, the nerve loses their myelin sheath and divide dichotomously and forms three plexus: stromal plexus, subepithelial plexus, and the intraepithelial plexus. Then the applied physiology of cornea. Primary physiological functions of the cornea are to act as a major refractive medium and to protect the intraocular contents. Then the last point is corneal transparency. It is a result of peculiar arrangement of corneal lamellae, peculiar refractive index of corneal lamellae, vascularity of the cornea, relative state of dehydration, swelling pressure of stroma counters the imbibition effect of IOP, and corneal crystallines, water-soluble proteins of the keratocytes. Thank you so much. This session is powered by digital version 2.0, Jyoti Vidyapeeth Women's University. I hope you are satisfied with my digital session. If you have any query, please write in the comment box. I will resolve it. Thank